Here we are at the Leadership Series. I'm Elle Ingalls, your host. I'm the creator of the Pressure-Free Method. I help people reduce stress, anxiety, so that they can truly step into their true potential. And I'm so happy to have this guest with us today, Kris Kelso. Welcome, Kris.
Thank you, Ellie. It's so good to be here.
So yeah, I'd love for you to share with our audience, who you are, and then dive right into
Mm,
some great content for us. And I'm going to turn us on to speaker mode so that the audience sees you.
Great. Thank you. And I'm going to try to be brief because my story has been an attorney and lots of interesting changes along the way. But essentially, I'm an entrepreneur. I have been for the majority of my career. I didn't start out that way. In fact, didn't think I would ever be an entrepreneur or have any interest in owning a business until one day something just changed, and it was like a switch flipped, and it was the only thing that made sense to me. And so I have founded two different companies that I've started and run for different periods of time. But for the last probably 6 years or so, I've been working primarily as a leadership coach with entrepreneurs and their leadership teams. And, in all the things that I've done, founding companies, consulting with private equity and investors, doing turnarounds, managing big mergers and acquisitions, lots of different interesting things that I've had as part of my career. There's one little detail that often usually gets left out that I've started to talk more about in the last few years. And that is the fact that the majority of the time, I did not feel qualified to do what I was doing. I did not feel prepared or adequately educated. In fact, a lot of my career, I've just been figuring it out on the fly and making it up as I go along. And I would find an interest and I would start to learn about it. I would pursue it. Even else, starting my business, my first company, I had no business experience whatsoever. I don't even have a college degree, never went to college. And so I remember going to a Barnes and Noble bookstore and buying a stack of books. Some of them are still on this bookshelf, but just buying a stack of books on everything I thought I needed to know about running a business: marketing, finance, legal, how to write contracts, how to scope a consulting engagement, just, whatever subjects came to mind. And I just read them all and started a company. And that was my education. And this
Wow.
was years ago before there were these entrepreneurial programs. Today, I'm a part of the Nashville Entrepreneur Center, and I'm involved with mentoring groups and these programs that have sprung up all over the country. But in those days, those either didn't exist or I just had no idea they were there. So I was a self-taught, self-learner, and I just, again, figured it out. But as a result, I had this pervasive fear that at some point, everybody was going to figure out that I really didn't know what I was doing, and that I was going to be exposed as a fraud, that somebody was going to come up with some concept or model that everyone should know, and I was the only one who didn't, and that was going to put me at risk. And I later realized that feeling has a name. It's called imposter syndrome. And I'm sure you've heard of it. I'm sure many of your listeners and viewers have heard of it, but imposter syndrome is the feeling that maybe I'm not what everyone seems to think I am. Maybe my success is more the result of luck or timing or just happening to figure out my way through it. But at any moment, somebody's going to realize that I don't know what I'm doing and I'm going to be exposed. And that's a real and pervasive problem. And when I learned about imposter syndrome, I started studying it and researching, and I started interviewing other entrepreneurs, and I found out that it's very widespread in the entrepreneurial community. And that eventually led to me writing a book, which you can see behind me, on this subject of battling imposter syndrome and ultimately overcoming those self-doubts and learning how to wrestle with those insecurities that we all face at some point in our career.
Wow, that is incredible. And yeah, it's as a musician, professional musician, imposter syndrome is real in the arts. It's real everywhere.
Yes.
Corporate
Yes.
corporate America as well. So I love how you came to write this book.
Well, here's the interesting thing. You mentioned artists and musician stuff. One of the most interesting facts that I uncovered that is very counterintuitive is that imposter syndrome tends to be more prevalent among high achievers. So you would think that very ambitious, very driven, very creative people would have more confidence. And in some ways they do. But in fact, the more driven and ambitious you are, the more likely you are to wrestle with self-doubt because you're pushing yourself. You're getting yourself into situations where you might be in over your head or you might feel inadequate. You're getting out of your comfort zone. And we know, Elle, that outside of your comfort zone is where the great things happen. It's where the magic is. It's where we have big accomplishments and we take bold risks, but that's also a very uncomfortable space to be in. And it can lead to a lot of self-doubt. And so that's where that imposter syndrome comes in. And so it tends to be, like I said, more prevalent among very creative, very ambitious, very driven, high achieving people.
It's a really, a real serious reason why people experience too much stress too, and why their bodies and their relationships break down, because they're living outside that comfort zone so much that it's taking its toll. So I love this so much. I talk about that comfort zone. I talk about expanding to be able to step into that without hurting yourself.
Yes. Right. Right.
So well, share with us, because this is just fantastic.
Yes. So I as I said, I started studying this topic for myself. I just wanted to understand that mental battle and what was going on. And so I did a lot of reading of research. I used to say I did a lot of research. The truth is I read a lot of great research on this topic. And I looked at studies that have been done over the last several decades. But I also talked to a lot of people about it. And when I started to interview entrepreneurs, and my book, by the way, is full of stories of other entrepreneurs and innovators and business owners that have faced this battle and how they've wrestled with it. I started to talk to people, and I discovered that, there's a couple of things about imposter syndrome that make it difficult for us to talk about it. One of those is that it's a very common experience. Up to 70 to 80% of the population experiences imposter syndrome at some point in their career, but it's very unique to each person. In other words, the thing that makes me insecure is going to be different than the thing that makes you insecure. I mentioned that my lack of a college degree, my lack of that formal education always made me feel like there was some gap or something that I was going to be missing. But I've talked to people who have multiple degrees, and they say, I always worried that my degree got me into situations that I actually wasn't equipped to handle, that my degree would open doors that then I couldn't confidently walk through, and that I got jobs that I wasn't ready for. And so the thing that causes me insecurity may be not only different, but even the opposite what causes you insecurity. And it makes it hard for to identify with each other in this particular area. And so one of the things imposter syndrome does is it tries to make you feel like you're the only one, that everybody else is fine, and you're the only one that struggles with your particular fear or insecurity. And so it causes you to want to isolate yourself. It causes you to withdraw and to not connect with other people because they're very confident in the area where you feel weak or insecure, and you don't want that exposure. And so it's sort of this insidious mind game that goes on, because it convinces us that nobody else struggles with this problem we do. But in fact, almost everyone around us is struggling with the same thing, just perhaps about a different topic or a different specific aspect of their life. And so once I realized that, once I started to see that pattern, I decided I've got to start the conversation around this. I've got to open those doors and get people to start talking about this, because once we realize that it's a very common struggle and we just have our own unique version of it, then we can start to support one another and help one another and lean on each other to build that confidence, because we really are in this together in many ways.
Oh, that's really beautiful. Can I share a little something that, like, sometimes imposter syndrome can hit you in the moment. Like, you're doing great, and then there's this hit. And here's one that happened for me. I was engaged to talk to 10 psychologists about my work. I don't have a psych degree. I never, I took a couple
Right.
psych classes as an undergrad, but that's it, right? So
Yeah.
so I walk in and I'm doing my thing, and it hit me. The imposter syndrome kind of came over me for a moment. And so I kind of called it out. This is how I called it out. I'm curious about your response here. So I said,
Mm,
I'm sharing my body of knowledge. And I love how you say reading about the research, right? Because that's me too, like diving into 20 years of all kinds of research. And
yeah.
so I said, well, I look around, I go, you already know this, don't you? Like, am I, and they look at me and they go, actually, no, we don't.
Mm,
And that's where I could kind of stand on my foundation of my
yeah.
narrow expertise on fight or flight, and really
Yeah.
stand. It was a big moment for me, Kris, like a big moment. It's
Right.
almost making me cry, because I was like, oh my gosh, I have dug deep on something, and I have something that people don't, even these experts
Yeah.
don't know. So
Yes.
it gave me this courage to then just open up some more.
Hmm.
So on the other side of the imposter syndrome, I'm sure you've got, like there's that clarity of what you can stand on and what you
Yes.
do know. And that was a big moment for me. That was very
Y-
helpful.
Yeah, these areas like psychology or health or wellness or performance or some of the things you do, they're so vast that even among other experts, you likely have something to offer that other people don't have. Like there are very few people that can cover it all.
Right.
Right. So
Yeah.
you get in a room full of psychologists and you're thinking, what can I bring to this conversation? And yet you've got a particular nugget, you've got a particular facet that where you've gone deep that other people haven't. And that's really valuable. The other thing that I think we discount the value of is our perspective and our take on a subject can be really helpful. I'm a teacher personality. I love to teach, and for a long time, I felt like all I'm really good at is teaching other people's information. Like I study a subject and then I convey it to people, and I don't really add anything unique to it. I don't have these unique ideas. Imposter syndrome is not my invention or idea. I didn't come up with this. It was the term was coined when I was an infant in the 70s, and so it's not new, and it's certainly not my creation. But what I've learned is that I can take a subject like this and put a spin on it and articulate it in a way that it resonates with someone for whom it's never connected before. My way of conveying it, or the particular analogy that I use, or something that I bring, the different facet or color that I give it, will cause it to be effective for somebody that has struggled with it before or has never quite understood it. And so I've learned that one of the skills that I have is explaining and teaching. And I've often said my addiction, my drug of choice, if you will, is seeing the aha moment on somebody's face when they understand something they've never understood before, or they have a realization that they've just never seen before, or they connect the dots between two things that have seemed to be unrelated. And so that's sometimes a value that we bring that we don't realize. We think we always have to have something new and novel to be valuable, but often it's just that we bring a perspective either from our background, our experience, or our method of communication that will allow something to take root and to grow and bear fruit in somebody's life when it has never quite landed that way before.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And that's a big takeaway right there too. It's like, for each person, how are we conveying? What is
Yeah.
your means of conveyance, whether to your
Yes.
team, your work team, in your family? Like, that's a big one right there.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, there's nothing new under the sun. We're just packaging it differently,
That's right.
and you know,
That's right. We're
you go
just
back to the
packaging it
1800s.
differently and hopefully reaching a new audience with that new and different packaging.
Hmm. Hmm. Wow, that's beautiful. So the second, your byline here is silence your inner critic and lead with confidence. Do you
Mm.
have some specific tool you can teach us about that silencing of that inner critic?
So the inner critic is that, voice in our head that tells us we're not worthy, we're not going to make it, we're at risk. And I actually call that inner critic the imposter. So the book is called Overcoming the Imposter because I gave that inner critic a name. And the reason I name it the imposter is that not just because it's trying to convince me that I'm an imposter, which it is. It's telling me that I'm a fraud, but really to remind myself that voice in my head isn't real. There's no one there. And that in fact, that voice, that inner critic will masquerade as wisdom. It's fear masquerading as prudence, masquerading, pretending to be, healthy caution or wisdom. Say, ooh, don't take that risk. Don't speak up in this situation. Don't go stand in front of a group of psychologists and purport to be an expert because they're going to see right through you and they're going to shoot you down and you have nothing to offer to those people. And that inner critic is pretending to be on your side and protect you, but it's a fraud. It's just there to hold you back.
Pretending to be an expert. I love that. Like masquerading as wisdom. That I want to shout that from the rooftops. Like your fear is masquerading from the roof, masquerading as wisdom. That's amazingly good.
Absolutely is. And so I call that voice the imposter. And so my book is all about recognizing it when it's happening, and then learning the tactics that it's going to take. It's going to try, I already mentioned, it's going to try to isolate you. That's one of the big tactics that it will do. The other thing that it's going to try to do is cause you to fear failure or really prey on your fear of failure. And that's going to put a lot of limits on your life. You're going to create some really hard and close boundaries if you are always in failure avoidance mode. Because failure is not something we should fear. Failure is learning. Failure is how success comes about. And we could spend the whole half hour we have here unpacking the idea of failure as learning. But it's really important for us to change our mindset from failure is something we have to be avoid and it puts us at risk to failure is the stepping stone on the path to success, that we fail our way to success. I give lots of examples in the book of that, such as Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth was a baseball player, one of the most famous. Even if you're not a baseball fan, you've probably heard of Babe Ruth if you're in America, because he was so well known and he held so many records from RBIs and slugging percentage and home runs, and his nickname, one of his nicknames, was the Sultan of SWAT because he could just hit the ball so hard and so far. But he had this other nickname that isn't often remembered. His other nickname was the King of Strikeouts. Babe Ruth held the major league record. His career total of 1,330 strikeouts was a major league baseball record for 30 years after he retired, until it was beaten by another guy you may have heard of named Mickey Mantle. So think about that. Mickey Mantle took the strikeout record away from Babe Ruth. And these guys are considered to be two of the greatest players of all time. And what that shows you is that they were able to accomplish big things because they weren't afraid to take risks and they took big swings and they had a lot of failures along the way, but they knew that those failures were helping them get to success. Because if you're not a baseball fan or a baseball player, you may not know that when a batter is facing off against a pitcher, there's a mental chess game that's going on there of what are the pitcher's tendencies? What ball is he going to throw next? Where is he going to try to throw the ball? And what are his patterns and tells? And how can I figure out and guess where he's going to throw the ball next so that I can hit it? So for a really good baseball player, every time they strike out, they learn something about that pitcher.
Oh, right.
They notice something that's happening there. And they will turn that learning, that strikeout is not a failure. It's a step towards being able to hit that pitcher's ball. And so the guys that stood there and didn't take the risk and didn't swing, and they were waiting for only the perfect opportunity, they often didn't have as much success as the guys that were really trying and kept at it and experienced a lot of failure on the way to their home run hitting record, like a Babe Ruth.
Oh, wow. Great example. That's so beautiful. I love it. It's
And so
amazing.
that this inner critic will try to make you afraid of failure, will try to isolate you, get you to withdraw from the people that you need to be connected with. And that can create this downward spiral where you are avoiding, you're avoiding fear, you're avoiding risk, and you're putting a lot of artificial limits on yourself. But once you recognize that pattern, you recognize what's happening, you can actually turn that voice of the inner critic into a positive sign. So one of the things that has personally come for me out of all the work that I've done around this topic and interviewing people and learning of all these examples is that when I start to feel self-doubt, when I get into a situation like you described in front of a bunch of psychologists, when I'm speaking to a university, and I go talk to colleges and universities now when I don't have a college degree, never attended myself, and they put me up as the expert. When I feel that inner critic starting to say, you're at risk here, I think, aha, this means that I'm doing something good. This means that I'm pushing the boundary. This means that I'm on the verge of accomplishment. Because, in the process of writing this book, I did sort of a retrospective of my career. I did a bunch of looking back and thinking through all the highs and lows and the points of my career so that I could extract stories to tell, to give examples of this journey. And I remember very distinctly, I had this aha moment where I realized that the moments in my career where I felt the most insecure and where that voice was the loudest, those were the moments that something great was happening. Those were some of the most pivotal moments of my career because I was starting a new business, or I was taking on a big project or a big client, or I was, hiring my first employee and thinking, what do I know about hiring an employee? I'm just a brand new entrepreneur. And I was trying things for the first time and taking those risks. And I felt very vulnerable, but that was actually me doing something great. And I realized that everything I've ever accomplished in my career, every time I've done something for the first time, it's been preceded by the same thing, which is a lack of experience. And so when I feel inexperienced, when I feel inadequate, when I feel like I'm not prepared, that often means I'm about to do something or experience something great. And I need to push through that fear rather than withdraw from it. And so I've learned to hear that voice, to hear that inner critic, but then to identify it as a positive sign and shut it down and say, I'm going to push through in spite of the fear and not give into it. And so that's what silencing your inner critic is all about. It's about saying, yeah, I hear that, but I'm not going to listen to it. Mm-hmm. And I'm actually going to let it fuel me and push me to do great things rather than to shirk back and to wallow in that fear and that criticism.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That is really fantastic. And in my work, I give people tools to be able to do that push. That's like
yes.
It's so sometimes they're body tools, how you hold your body, how you use your body.
Right.
How most people choke off their breathing in that moment. So they can't even breathe. And then they go into fight or flight. Their face turns red. So now you're in front of that big audience and you're like, oh crap, my face is red.
And then it starts to perpetuate itself because you feel embarrassed that your face is red, and that makes you feel even more like a failure or like you're unprepared or inadequate. Yeah. Last year, I wrote an article for Fast Company magazine that touched on this topic. And the basic idea of the article was that the sensations of nervousness and excitement are very, very similar. That when you're nervous or anxious, the body response is very similar to excitement and anticipation. And in fact, both are a form of anticipation. One is anticipation of a negative outcome, and the other is anticipation of a positive outcome. And so when you're in that mode where you're starting to feel jittery and nervous, when you're about to do something and you're worried, the conventional wisdom is to calm down, to take a deep breath, to try to settle your nerves. And in reality, that rarely works. When your body is already heightened.
My method.
Well, there are some methods to do it, but when your body is heightened, it's really hard to suppress those feelings. But what you can do is reframe that energy.
Definitely.
By saying, I'm not nervous, I'm excited. Right? I'm not I'm not afraid. I'm anticipating something good. And so that energy that I'm feeling is not negative energy, it's positive energy. And actually turn
Yes.
it to your advantage to say that this is a good thing. And the sensation being very similar is very easy to reframe and then set yourself up for, this is not about to be an embarrassment. This is about to be an accomplishment. This is not something I'm going to be embarrassed about. This is something I'm going to be proud of when this is over. And so
Yeah.
fuel, harness that energy rather than trying to just suppress or eliminate it, because it can actually be helpful to you.
Yeah, yeah. And when you find that, I call it the sweet spot. I work with a lot of athletes. You find the
Mm,
sweet spot of your athletic heart rate. So you haven't
yes.
gone into fight or flight.
Yes.
And I just
Yes.
was working with a guy who was my private client. He came to a retreat this summer, and I hadn't mentioned it in our private discussions. I didn't know he was
Mm-hmm.
a sprinter in high school.
Mm,
He was a sprinter, and what I tell my runners is be careful when you're in your accelerated warm-up heart rate, that when you hear the starting gun, you don't pop into fight or flight.
yeah.
There's a boundary there. If you go in, you've
Yeah.
lost it, and you'll hit the wall. Even in a sprint, you'll hit the wall. You'll see it. And so this guy goes, "Oh my gosh." He goes, "I was the anchor for my 4x100. My best
Mm,
times were when I was anchoring because I wasn't near the starter gun."
yeah.
So he
Yeah.
didn't go into fight or flight. So his times in that last 100 far surpassed any time he was running the straight 100.
Right.
So interesting.
Right.
So our
Yes.
bodies are so reactive to the tiniest little thing, even to facial expressions when we're working with people. All these little
Yeah.
cues we get. And I'm sure you have too. I misread people. I think
Yes.
people are like, they might
Yes.
have their arms folded, and I'm thinking, oh, they're bored of my talk or whatever. And then they'll come up at lunch and say, "Oh my gosh, I need your work so much." And
Yes.
totally misread
I've
it. And
I've
that will
had that
cause
very experience.
and that's the imposter voice.
It is that inner critic will build the most negative version of the circumstances that you're experiencing. Because when something like that happens, when someone makes a face or their posture is not what we expect, whatever, we have to fill that void with a story. We have to. There are things we know. Elle is not smiling at me. That's something I know, but I have to fill the void of the gap of I don't know why, right? And so we make up a story as to what's going on in your head, as to what that person is thinking about us, and it can tend to be a very negative one. It can
Oh yeah.
tend to be the worst case scenario. Oh, she must be, really upset with something I said, or I must have, completely fumbled the ball here, or, I've done something terribly wrong and this is not going well at all. And in fact, we don't know that to be the case until
That's true.
we ask, until we have the conversation, until we dig in.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, we have to
Mm-hmm.
recognize that propensity to go negative and counteract it with what are the possibilities.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm actually provoking something in her and she's frowning because she's realizing something about herself and she's ready to make a change. And there's something good happening inside. It's painful. Often the good work is painful and difficult. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, there could be a bunch of reasons why that reaction is happening that don't have to do with my performance in the moment. But
Yeah.
it's hard to capture those thoughts and arrest them and not let them rule us in the moment, and decide I'm going to build a narrative that serves me well and will help me perform at my best.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's wow. You and I we could continue this conversation
Yes.
for you on the other side of the screen there for a long time, because all of this it's so critical to our success as leaders and to breaking through all those little things. And the thing you just brought up, like, we create great fiction in our heads. This
Yes,
story, just
we
right in
do.
that little moment, that you've built a whole story around this person. You don't even know them, and you've
Yeah.
built this whole story in your head. And
Yes.
so it's those stories that we often have to pay some attention to too, and just say, wow, I'm a great fiction writer is what I tell my clients. That was an amazing story you built there.
Yes. That's a great way to look at it. Just call it fiction. Just say that's a really great story, but it's not true. So I'm going to throw it away.
It's kind of the same thing of is this fear, is this excitement, like the reframing.
Yeah.
And that reframing actually opens up your blood vessels. I mean, it
Yeah.
changes what happens in your being. Every thought we have is an electrical impulse. It affects every cell of our body, every
Yeah.
process of our body. And people are
Yeah.
so unaware of that.
Yes. Yeah. The connection between the mental and the physical is much stronger than often we realize.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Kris, thank you so much for this. This was just really, really beautiful and so many little takeaways for people. I
Yeah.
know you've got something, a way people can connect to you. Do you want to share like how people can connect? And we'll have the link down below
Yes.
here.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to offer a free chapter of my book. And it's not the first chapter where all I do is talk about the problem and not give you any solutions. It's actually from the second half of the book, and I think it may be the best chapter in the book. And so your viewers can get that free chapter from overcomingtheimposter.com/resources. There's a place to directly grab a hold of that free chapter. And there's some other things available there too to help you think about and reframe the voice of the inner critic in your life.
Wow. Thank you so much, Kris. And we'll have the link down below here. I'm excited to bring on our next speaker for tomorrow, so stay tuned. Kris Kelso, this has been really, really wonderful. Thanks for sharing.
You're welcome, Ellen. Thanks for having me. I've enjoyed it.
You're so welcome. Any last parting tidbit or thing you want people to really come away from this with?
You know what? I'll give you one last nugget. The imposter syndrome at the root is a fear of vulnerability. It's a fear of being exposed for who you really are. And yet, what I have learned is that vulnerability is the answer. It is what you need to overcome the imposter. And so you're going to need to lean into that. And that's a lot easier said than done. But I've got a lot of extra, a lot more writing and a lot more to offer on that topic of leaning into vulnerability. It's an important key in overcoming that self-doubt.
Wow. What's coming up for me when I hear that from you is I need to get myself out of isolation.
Yes,
I need to be
absolutely.
vulnerable and get myself out of isolation and make sure I have the support around me. Don't
Yeah.
silo. We silo. Entrepreneurs, we silo. And
Yes.
I've really learned in my 12 years as an entrepreneur that I can't do that. That's not healthy for me.
No.
So that
We
is
need
really,
community.
really
We need to be connected, but it's got to be a healthy community.
healthy
And
community.
vulnerability is the key to that community being helpful, healthy.
Well, thank you so much, Kris. And
You're
I wish
welcome.
everybody a great pressure-free day. We will see you tomorrow with another speaker. Have a great one.